Corbitt Wall. And every morning I pretty much hear, how's it go? This is Corbitt Wall with DV Auction here with your feeder flash.
Exactly.
That's Corbitt Wall. And so I guess I was saying this weekend, I feel bad for anybody that has to introduce me because I don't really know how to explain what I do, but I'll let you introduce yourself and explain what you do for people that don't know.
Well, like you just said, I work with DV Auction. DV Auction is a livestock, mostly cattle auction broadcaster. We broadcast about 1,500 bull sales a year. We do over 100 regular cattle auctions a week, and I am a fundamental market analyst for DV Auction, and I've got a humbling following. And every business day, I talk on what I call the feeder flash about the things that are affecting the commercial cattle market day in and day out. And
Yeah,
for
and
some
that's
reason, I've gotten into these cattle politics, which I have no interest in getting into. But if you're talking about the markets, they affect the markets, and so I've had to get involved in that, basically just telling folks what how I feel about the different issues, and more often than not, it pisses other people off, and they think that I should think about it the way that they do. But I always think about the issues in the way that they're going to affect the small producers and the cattle auctions and marketing, and I'm not going to push over because somebody thinks that this is the way we need to do it.
yeah. And I've watched enough where I know your interest comes from kind of the future of those small operations and of those sale barns and if you care about those things, you don't really have a choice.
Right.
Um, and I was thinking how you talk about your following. It is interesting to think. I feel like I know you way better than you know me. We went to dinner. I guess I should say I met you, I think it's been almost 3 years ago. Our friend Jack Payne invited me to dinner with you guys. We went to the worst steakhouse in Nashville, I
You're right.
think, where we had to sit and wait for I don't know how long. It felt like 2 hours. But the good thing about it was you were there, and I think you told jokes the entire time, one
That
after
does
another.
that does not sound like something I would do.
And they got more and more inappropriate as you had to search for more and more jokes.
Well, of course I was taking ammunition for that too. You know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. But I mean, it just kind of felt like that's an auctioneer for you. You know, you go to dinner and get terrible service, have to sit there for 2 hours, and you're still entertained to have a good time. And
Okay.
so that's that's kind of how I think of you. But I'm curious kind of I want to get into kind of where you come from, how you got to where you are, and then we'll kind of get into maybe more of what you got going on here in the next couple of weeks, a couple of big events and
Okay.
things. So you grew up in New Mexico, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Was that on
Yeah.
a ranch?
Northeastern New Mexico, around Clayton, New Mexico. My grandfather actually built the sale barn in Clayton long before I was born. And we were tied to that part of the country when I was born. My dad was a in the cattle business. He was more of a trader than he was anything. Uh, and when I was real small, he was just a sale barn trader. And then as I got a little bit older, he was buying strings of cattle in the country, and at that time traded on them. You didn't have to have everything sold before you bought it. You could buy cattle, put a contract on it, and put a down payment on the cattle, and then they were basically yours until delivery. Or you had to do something with them, and he would trade those things around too. And later on in life, whenever I got to learning about that, I said, "My gosh, you used to have a contract book full of cattle that you'd bought in the country and didn't have them sold, and then you would trade them later on." And he said, "Well, we couldn't survive on just regular commission. I had to mark them up a little bit or tried to." And I said, "Well, how could you stand the risk?" And he said, at that time in the late 70s and early 80s, he said, if through the whole fall, if the market moved 50 cents a hundred, that would be huge. Well, now it moves,
Yeah.
several dollars a hundred every single day. And he said, basically the onset of the CME cattle futures is what caused that volatility and made things as dangerous as they are today.
Yeah. So your campaign against the futures market goes back
Not
generations.
necessarily. I'm just saying that's what's made it so volatile. And I think anybody that was in business then and in business now would agree with that. It
Yeah.
does offer risk management also, which is a good
Right.
thing because you can't operate without risk management today.
But so your grandpa, he built a sale barn, so your roots are deep in that, and that's
Yes,
part of it too.
yeah, my father and I, we had a sale barn for a short time, and then he was in horrible health at that time, so I mostly had to run it by myself, without enough experience, know-how, or capital to do it. And 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 that's one reason that I went into the industry uh, and getting a job is because I say at a young age, whenever I was in college, my father he had had several bouts with serious health problems, and I always say whenever I got out of college, all my buddies got a ranch and I got a job because that's what
Yeah.
I needed to do. And so I went to work right out of college with USDA Market News, and I put in 18 years with them until it got to the point where the Obama administration had trickled down even to my level at the USDA, and it was really no longer feasible for me to work there. And at that point, I went to work with DB Auction, and that's been over 10 years ago now.
Hmm. Yeah. But to go back to your grandpa's sale barn, is that barn still there?
It is, and I think most of the same pins are still being used, and that was in the late 40s whenever he built that. But yeah, Five State Livestock in Clayton, New Mexico.
Hmm.
And they are a DB auction broadcaster, so you can watch their sale every Wednesday.
Yeah. Do you ever go? Do you ever get there?
I had to put
Help
a new
out?
camera in there a few years ago, and it's not all that far from where I live in
Hmm.
Canyon, Texas now. So if I'm going through there on sale day, I'll stop in and visit with some old friends,
Yeah.
and I check them out from time to time.
You said you ran a barn with your dad. It was that one, right? That's
No, it was not that one. It
Oh, it
was
was a
another
different one?
one there. Huh?
Where was it
And
at?
then that one was closer to Clovis, New Mexico, and we ended up selling that to a dairy sale operation. The dairies kind of took over uh, the Clovis area, Portales area, New Mexico, and there's a lot more dairy activity going on as far as cattle as there is beef cattle in that part of the country.
Yeah.
And so they bought that sale barn to have heifer sales in and to sell out cows, and then they still operate that sale too.
Did you go to auctioneer school or did you just grow up in a sale barn and know how to do it?
Me and my best buddy, when we were, I think, freshmen in college, my buddy Ty Cranmer, we decided that one summer we were going to go to auctioneer school, and we went to Kansas City to Missouri Auction School, and we were there for 2 weeks, and we had an absolute blast. And they give you the chance to do and all that kind of thing. And basically what it does is when you get home it gives you the right to tell everybody you've been to auctioneer school. And so every time they're having a cake auction or a pie sale or a 4-H premium sale or anything like that, they drag you up there, and if you continue to have the balls to try it, eventually they'll make some kind of an auctioneer out of it.
Yeah. I was interested. I was listening to Justin Tupper. I was in North Dakota this weekend and I saw him. And then of course, I went up to him and I haven't seen him since that deal in Nashville, but I went
Oh
up and
yeah,
said,
yeah,
I said, "Hey, it's my old buddy Justin Tupper." Because that's how and he knew right away what I was talking about. Because if you
yeah.
watch Feeder Flash, Justin Tuber's an auctioneer in South Dakota, and anytime he gets mentioned, anytime Corbitt mentions him,
Yeah.
it's his old buddy Justin Tuber.
Everybody's my old buddy if I know him. You know how that
But
goes.
right, yeah, I know you got a lot of friends. That's the other thing I was thinking. You got so many friends. It seems like one of them's dying every week or so, and then you
Oh,
have
tell me
to.
about it, man. It's killing me.
But
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
when I was with USDA, well, growing up, I was like most people in ag. I'd never been all that far from home. We used to take cattle to Denver to the stock show, and I think that was the farthest I'd ever been from home, which that wasn't 8 hours away.
hmm
And then when I started with USDA at that time, they made you live in different spots and travel around so that you would accumulate knowledge about how things worked all around the country. And I worked in the Twin Cities. I worked at the Minneapolis Grain Exchange, and I worked at the South St. Paul Stockyards. After I left the Amarillo area with USDA, I went to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and ran the markets out there. And I was the only representative going north, so went up into New England, graded cattle in New York and in Vermont. And I used to sell a feeder cattle auction in Vermont twice a year for many years, even after I left USDA, and got to get familiar with that part of the country. And then I went back down to the breadbasket to St. Joe, and I spent the bulk of my adult life around St. Joe, Missouri, and traveled all around there, grading delivery cattle and reporting markets and but doing relief work and just all kinds of things.
hmm.
So I was able to meet a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah, all throughout the country. Yeah, you. That's the other thing. If you watch Feeder Flash every once in a while, I like when you get into your stories of, especially like your Amish country and different
Yeah.
things like that. It's pretty interesting. But I always kind of thought you were just like a market reporter kind of guy, but you were doing all kinds of stuff, huh?
Well, I was a market reporter for the first few years, but then after that, I was mostly a market reporting supervisor. So I trained people that worked for the different states how to report markets, and
Hmm.
of course we were livestock graders, so we had to travel around and do quite a bit of livestock grading whenever they would deliver fat cattle on the against the CME board. They would have us more seasoned graders go in and grade those cattle at delivery and things like that. So, got to travel around and do a lot of different things. And it was fun for a long time. And like I say, it just got to the point where, and after I started doing market videos, I am a little bit judgmental, or I put out my points of view, and the government couldn't handle that at all. They
Yeah.
they liked the video market reports, but they wanted me to be a robot, and I couldn't do that, so I had
Yeah,
to
I was
move
gonna
on.
say that makes sense. You're talking about cattle grading and market reporting, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why you get on these market reporters at the different
Oh,
regions and stuff. And
drives
then
me
you're also
crazy.
talking about video, the camera grading that they have now, and so it all goes back to your time at USDA where you were in charge of that kind of stuff, and now you see it and it's not done right, so you bring it
Yeah.
up.
We trained people back in those days, and God, I'm starting to get old, but I don't feel like I'm old. But I get to thinking about that, and I'm like, well, that had to have been 20 years ago, and hell, it was 30 years ago. And we trained and we trained and we trained and we trained before they ever turned us loose reporting a market. Now these guys show up, retired ag teachers, county agents, and stuff like that. They show up the first day and they turn them loose, and they have no idea what they're doing. And I don't blame the market reporters. I blame their supervisors or their training, which they don't do much of at all. And mostly their excuse is, well, since COVID, we can't travel. I'm thinking that's BS. You don't want to leave the house because none of them have offices anymore. They work
Right.
from the house, which gets to be kind of hard to leave after a while.
Yeah. I don't know how many years the COVID excuse is gonna work, but I
No
guess they're
kidding.
still
Yeah,
using it.
exactly.
Um, but yeah, so. You said you did like video market reports when you worked at USDA?
I first started there. It's actually a guy that I still work with DV Auction. His name was Rob Cook, and at that time, websites were just starting to get popular, especially in the ag field. And he owned a website, and this was when would this been back in the early 2000 teens, probably like 11, 12. And he owned a cattle website called cattlenetwork.com. And he came to my office one day and he said, he said, your report, your national feeder cattle summary, which I wrote a long commentary section on, he said, that's one of our most famous, most popular reports that people like to get on there and look at. He said, the problem is people are too lazy to read. And I got to thinking, I think, yeah. And if you think now, I mean, it's not even a novel concept that people are too lazy to read. I mean, look at them watching us right now. They don't
Yeah.
want to read a 10-page article about this. They just soon watch it. And he said, do you think you could read that on video, and I could post it on our website? And I thought, well, I'm not going to read to people, but I could summarize it or something like
Hmm.
that. And he goes, yeah. He said, could we do that? And so it was a new thing at that time. Now you turn on, you look at your phone, and there's always somebody with a cowboy hat telling you about cattle markets. And I was the first one to do that. And at that time, couldn't do it on the phone. We didn't even text really at that time. And I was in St. Joe, Missouri, and actually the American Angus Association helped us with that. And Eric Grant is with the Grant Company, and he's left the American Angus Association, but he was there with them, helping them with their recordings and things like that. And I went over there, and Eric or one of his interns would film me standing there and doing my summarization of that week's National Feeder Cattle Summary, and then they would put it out. But of course, you would with the government, we couldn't put it out on social media, which was kind of a new thing at that time too. But we could send it to different websites, and that's how I first started doing what I call the feeder flash now.
Yeah.
And in that time, it was just a cattle market summary.
Right. You're the
But
pioneer.
yeah, I kind of evolved from that. So, but
Right.
and when I first started with DV auction, they're like, well, you're not very techy. What are we going to do here? And then it kind of turned into a monster.
Yeah. So when you
Yeah.
started, well, I guess go back to USDA. You said there was one time you were talking about how you traded cattle some while you worked at USDA. Were you
Well,
ever?
I started when I left home, and then eventually my dad passed away. I was desperately wanting to get back into running cattle because that's what I grew up doing, and if you get started on that, you just kind of got that itch, and I would always find myself wherever I was stationed, wanting to go help people that were running cattle or taking care of them or doing something. And when I got to Missouri, Northwest Missouri, and I moved about 40 miles east of St. Joe out to a little town called Maysville, Missouri. And I was able to buy me a little acreage, and I was able to lease me some grass and kind of start running some cattle. And so I did that for 15 years, most of the time that I was there, but did what I grew up doing, what I wanted to do, straightening up high risk cattle, buying singles, making bunches out of them, trying to market loads of little yearlings there, late in the summer and early fall, and really enjoyed that for a long time. And then later on, I ended up moving back to Texas, and when I got to Texas, and I was thinking, gosh dang, it'd take the 4 6's ranch to run as many little yearlings as I was running on 100 acres in
Yeah.
Missouri. I
Yeah,
was like,
That's
probably two and a half hours away. Just south of me, probably straight south of me.
yeah, you know
Um,
where I'm from. Yeah. So,
yeah, yeah.
it doesn't take a lot of pasture there to run several cattle. And that's when I also learned for sure about what it takes to be a cowboy. you see people that run a lot of cattle in the Midwest, but you don't consider them to be cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because the cattle can still hear you holler at them with the bucket, and they come running. You get out where
Yeah.
Jack Payne's at in Nevada, you can't see them. You can't see them,
Right.
even in the helicopter. A lot of times, there's cattle that he
Mm-hmm.
don't see for years.
Yeah.
It takes a pretty good cowboy to round them up whenever they can't hear you and you can't see them.
Yeah. That's the thing. We leased a pasture for a while, and my brother uses a lot of dogs, and we use horses and stuff. And there's a pretty deep gully in there, creek that runs through there, and we would run cattle on both sides of it. And then landlord died, and we lost that deal. And so the next guy come in, well, they plowed the other side of that creek because if you can't get a side by side over it around here, you're not gonna run cattle on it. It seems like.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty interesting. What year? So what year did you start doing the videos? What year was it?
I think it was about 2011 or
Oh,
12 is when I
really?
started doing them with USDA.
Yeah.
And then I went with DV in 2017 or
You
actually it was
said
a little
10
bit
years.
before that. Yeah. So it was about 20. Yeah, I was about 16 when I went with DV. And then I started doing them once a week. And we started finding better ways to disseminate them. And we started selling advertising on them. And then I went to 2 days a week, and then I went to 3 days a week, and now it's every business day, so 5 days a week. And I think if they thought they could, they would make me do them on the weekends and maybe
Christmas.
overnight things like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Christmas too.
But yeah,
But
it's
it's kind of gotten to be a morning ritual for a lot of cattle producers all over the country and Canada and it's a pretty humbling deal. And and like I said, the following is humbling, and it's not like baskets of cute kittens or girls gone wild or anything like that. It's just me sitting there talking about the cattle market. So if you can get people to keep tuning in, you must be doing something right.
yeah, it is. You've hit a niche though. Like I said, me and my daughters probably listen to your voice about as much as anybody. I have a 2-year-old daughter now, and we sit and eat breakfast in the morning. And she's probably heard you. She's only been around for 2 years, and pretty much most of it you're playing in the background over breakfast. But it is something also you talk about every day, it really gets people to pay attention and understand kind of what I mean, it's helped me a ton just to understand like what's going on all the time.
Right.
And there's slow days, and I don't think people either realize. I think anybody watching this should sit down in front of their camera and point at their face and try to say stuff into it. Because when I
Oh, I
first
know.
started
I
doing
know.
that, I was like, this is one of the hardest things I've learned to do. And it's easy in this situation where we're talking to each other, but when you're sitting in a room by yourself and
Yeah,
you gotta point that camera at yourself, it's
I
a
know.
different deal. And I don't think people realize. I always think like I don't know how you do it every single day and you come up with how long are they? 20, 15, 20 minutes every day.
When we first started that with DV auction, we were going to call that, and we did for a while, called it the 3 minute market update. And I don't know that I ever did one in 3 minutes because I talk kind of slow anyway.
Yeah.
I grew up in eastern New Mexico and West Texas, so I drag everything out pretty well. And most of the people that know me well tell you that it takes me forever to do anything. So it never did work out for the 3 minute deal. So then we come up with the feeder flash, and I thought it was kind of corny whenever we first mentioned it, but it's kind of caught on, and so
Yeah.
it's better than digging post holes.
Yeah. I was gonna say, it's what else do you do? I guess what's your day look like? Everybody sees you for 10 minutes of your day, and you're usually like right now. It's pretty obvious you're in a hotel, so I'm
Right.
supposed half the time you're traveling around.
I'm gone about half the time. So I go out. I'm like we're going to talk about that. I assume I'm going out to to Jack Payne's in Fallon, Nevada. Tomorrow I'll be flying out there for the feeder cattle auction and the Trump rally. So be gone 3 or 4 days out there and then come back and be around for a couple of days. And then I'm going out to Rapid City to that rally for Harriet Hageman's bill. And then I do broadcast sales for DV. I've gotten into this racehorse deal, and I've been broadcasting a lot of racehorse sales for the last few months. We did one in San Antonio. We did all the ones at Ruidoso, and then we do the Heritage Place racehorse sales in Oklahoma City. That's several days out. I probably do 25 or 30 bull sales, go out on site and set up the equipment and do that, which is very, very few compared to most people that work with DV. You know, there's a lot of them, especially up in the Dakotas, even Iowa, where you live,
Hmm.
Nebraska. You know, you get out in February and March, there's a bull sale on the corner of every section line, you know, and we broadcast most of them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people are busy doing those every day. I'm kind of the floater, which I work for DV all the time. So if they've got one in you know, wherever Utah or Alabama or something, we can't get a guy there, then I'll go do that one.
So
So
you are like a DV auction rep and you
I
just do
am.
feeder flash
I
on
just,
top
you know,
of it, really.
yes, yeah, yeah.
So
Whenever they get done with the sale and get all their stuff put up, you know, they can go over to the hospitality area and relax, and then I got to go back to the room and start putting another feeder flash together.
think about what you have to say.
Yeah,
How long does it take you to put it together compared to how long it takes you to? I suppose it depends on what's going on.
it does. And if I'm around home, and you know, I usually set down, you know, in the fall of the year, especially, you know, I got to wait till the sales are over. And then we have a system where over 250 sale barns send their information right from the clerk's computer right in. So, you know, I can't wait till they put the government market reports out the next day. And like I said, they're not very good. So I wait till the sales are over, and a lot of those sales run later into the evening. And I usually sit down about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening and start putting it together. And if I get it recorded and sent out by midnight, I've done pretty good. But if I wanted to live a life and maybe go do something in the evening, then it's probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning before I put it
Mm.
out.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. People would probably have no idea that. They probably just think you grab some numbers and sit down and crank it
Well,
out.
it takes some preparation to do this stuff. You know that. I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah.
gotta make yourself a cheat sheet. You know, I can think up the bullshit to say. I can't remember all the quotes and things like that. You know,
Yeah. And
so
I'm sure the days
I
start
have to make
running
a
together and reports
sure,
start running together and
and I've got to make a cheat sheet with those exact quotes. You know, and make sure that I'm correct on those. I can fill in the stuff in between, which that gets easier over time.
hmm. So I started watching probably around 2019 when all that kind of stuff was going on. You talked about how you had to get into issues. Is that when the Holcomb fire, is that kind of when you started getting into issues, or were you talking about it more back before then, or was
Yeah, I can't remember. You know, one of the issues that drives me nuts is the fact that we don't have any or any. I said we don't have much negotiated fat cattle trade every week. When I first started with Market News with USDA, I worked in the Amarillo office and I was finishing grad school. And that's what we did in that office was we called feed yards, and then we had about 4 sheets, single spaced, I mean, just full of feedlots. And we would call them, we would start calling them usually in the middle of the week to see if they had anything priced or if there was any feedlot or any packer buyers coming around making any offers or anything. And then on a Thursday, we would just be calling all of them, trying to figure out whenever that trade started, and then we would report it. And immediately when we found the first feedlot that had sold cattle and we had it confirmed, we would send out that report. And then 3 minutes later, Cattle Facts would come out and project that 20,000 head had sold there. And that's the way that deal goes. But we used to pound the phones, talking to feedlots, and of course some of the guys were great, some of them were assholes. Some of the assholes were good when the market was up, and you just when you're dealing with that many different people, that's the way it goes. Uh, and we also talked to the country packer buyers. They would call us, and tell us what was going on, especially if the market was down. They'd call and, oh, I got all these cattle bought here $2 cheaper, and like, of course, then we'd have to call the feed yard and make sure that that happened. And sometimes they didn't really want to tell us, but we confirmed everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then on Fridays we'd come in and we'd call the scheduler at the packing plants, and we had all the cattle listed that we knew went into that plant. And then we would get confirmation that those numbers were right. And we did a pretty good job of it. And at that time in the Amarillo office, we would get 100,000 every week, nearabouts, give or take 10, 15,000. We get about 100,000 every week. And today, that same feedlot area will sell about 5,000. And all of them are just sold off the formula negotiations, which
Yeah.
those negotiations are once a year, and then that formula runs for a year. But it's still loosely based off of that cash price.
All right.
And the Packers do such a good job of keeping that cash price, um, you know, under pressure all the time. And if they're going to give a little bit more for some cattle, they'll always put some kind of a kicker on them, that depends on how they slaughter, and then that throws them into a formula. So there's hardly any live negotiated price to put a base on all these formulas that have taken over the industry,
All right.
and it's just a weight on the market all the time. And I talk more about feeder cattle markets probably than anything, but there's nothing more important than that one price you get for fat cattle every week. That everything else is a derivative of that. And so, we got into Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act, and that's when I got more involved with the U.S. Cattlemen's Association because they were really pushing that. It's still out there, but nobody's wanting to push it. But uh, they didn't want to put mandates on the packers to have to buy a minimum percentage of their cattle in a negotiated manner. And I thought that was ridiculous. Harped on that for a long time. And I still talk about it a lot because I think it's frustrating, and I think it'll be the downfall of the industry because I watched the hog industry go down because there wasn't a transparent price that was available all the time. And once your packers, they get everything, they get control of everything through either owning them through their their derivatives, their feedlots or whatever, owning the cattle there or having them under contract. It gets to the point where, what business is it of ours what the price of those cattle is?
Yeah.
If they own them all and they have control of all of them, why do they even have to report that? That's where the hog industry went. That's why nobody feeds hogs anymore because they took that away from us.
Yeah. And so did you see that kind of gradually, or was there a point where everybody was kind of like went, hold on here, And the other thing, I like to explain things a little bit, that when he says formula, those are all confidential, those
Yeah,
contracts.
well,
So we,
technically they report the formula arrangements to mandatory price reporting, but the heck of it is they have confidentiality rules, so they can't let anything stick out that would show any entity, any feeder or any packer, and so they have these huge price ranges on all these variables, and you can't make heads or tails out of
all right.
any of
Yeah. So was there a time when when was kind of the realization that this was a major problem?
Well, I started with market news. I worked for meat grading for a short time before that, but I started with market news in 1996, and we were still selling, like I said at that point, 100,000 head Texas feedlot area, 100,000 head in Kansas. You know, all together, almost all the cattle sold negotiated cash, and then we just started seeing, well, where are these cattle going? That's a formula deal. That's a formula deal. Then pretty soon you saw all your big corporate feeders get into formula arrangements with their one packer buddy. And my whole life has all been about competition, especially if you're in a cattle auction. You're selling cattle and you've got people, across the other side of the ring that are wanting to buy them, and you're offering up the goods. That whenever you take a huge feeding enterprise and they're only doing business with one packer, and it's all on a formula deal, they've promised all their cattle to them. That's when I realized, everybody talks about premiums and discounts. The only real premium in the cattle feeding uh, is volume, and lots of it. And a lot of those big corporate feeders, they feed really plain cattle. And not only really plain cattle, they feed the plain Mexican cattle. There's different types of Mexican cattle. Everybody thinks they're all Coriani crosses. They're not. My buddy Tato Medina down in Santa Teresa, New Mexico, he sells the better end of the Mexican cattle, and they look like cattle right out your window. I tell you what,
Hmm.
they're nice cattle. But there's an end of them that's still those painted up things.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of those corporate feeders that only feed or predominantly feed those kind of cattle, and their cattle are bringing more than the best farmer feeder in Iowa, and I just don't feel like that's right.
Yeah. And it's kind of like you talk about that timeline, and it's like I grew up on a place where we fed 300, typical Iowa farm, really. We were probably a bigger feeding operation than most, but we'd feed out 300 head and we'd take them to stockyards. And through my high school years was when, IBP came in, and we started. I can remember my dad stopped going to stockyards and we'd sell them on the grid at IBP. And so as time went on, and those numbers you give, they probably correlate exactly with how many people are actually feeding cattle. I mean, it has just reduced, like we don't do it anymore. And the thing with the feedlots, it has made them, the little guys have went away or they've either got big. So there's a lot of big feedlots and very few or to almost none small ones, and there's just a fewer number altogether, which is a bummer. I mean, kind of the main problem, I guess. Um, but we talk about you getting involved in issues, and I wanted to get into the EID thing. And you got into that issue, I guess, right away. And I wanted to talk about the NCBA policy that you kind of brought everybody, you kind of opened people's eyes to. I hadn't read it when you started talking about it. How did you come to find that? I guess to go on, NCBA had this policy before their convention that they kind of put out, and I hadn't heard about it, but you had read it and you kind of let people know what was in it, which was mandated electronic identification ear tags on all cattle by I think 2026.
Yeah, they were going to talk last year at the Florida meeting. NCBA was had plans to vote on a policy, which once you get involved in these associations, and they've got a lot of personnel, and what they do is they vote on policy with their membership, and then the folks that work for them or lobby for them or whatever, they start pushing, whatever the policy is. That's what their job is to drive the policy. And growing up, excuse me, like you, I thought, Texas Cattle Feeders Association, man, that's a great outfit. Uh, National, I call them Corporate Beef Association now, but NCBA, that's got to be a great outfit. And man, whenever I started getting knee deep in the industry and started seeing what they were doing, and how they're getting nearly all the checkoff dollars, and then they're in these fancy offices with these big commercial stainless steel kitchens and all this kind of stuff that they use 2 or 3 times a year. And I'm thinking, my gosh, this is such a waste of money. And then when I started getting more familiar with the issues and found out that almost every single time they are they are for issues that would hurt the small producers, and they're against issues that would help the small producers. And then you notice that they're just like tongue and groove with the big corporate outfits that are driving the small people out. And then you realize that, oh, well, they're the ones that are making the policies, basically, and showing them what to do. But yeah, probably the worst one I got into is we started seeing, and and it was just it was about a year ago at this time, or maybe a little bit later. Uh, they started talking about this mandatory electronic ID tags. And at that point, I was like, my gosh, mandatory? They're going to have to do this. And then I saw where NCBA was going to vote on that, and they were going to make policy. And of course, it's just like Fox News or MSNBC. When you're getting your information from one way and they're trying to sway you that way, then you kind of feel the pull a little bit. And I started just alerting my listeners, that hey, this is real. This is something that's happening, and I started having pretty influential people, like a Jackie Moore, who I've been buddies with for 25 years. He called me and he said, "You got to be shitting me." He said, they're going to be wanting tags on all these cattle," and I said, "Well, they've already got it on the dairy cattle." And I said, it's mandatory on the dairy cattle now. And then coming up in November of 2024, which is coming right up here, then they're going to make it mandatory on all the breeding stock or the intact breeders over 18 months. And and a lot of people that doesn't bother that much. The only reason it bothers me so much is because I know as soon as they get that done, they're going to implement it on all classes of cattle. And I just instantly, no one, being around the auction business and the commercial cattle and business as long as I've been around it, I just knew that that was not feasible. It's not going to happen. And like everything else, they're going to put the onus on the cattle auctions to implement all this. That they're just going to swing a hammer or make a vote or do whatever and say, okay, this has to be done. How the hell are we going to do it?
Right.
Oh, we'll just make them do it when they sell them.
Yeah. And how many's Jackie Moore? You brought up Jackie Moore. How many's he sell on a big sale day?
Well,
Joplin.
he called me shortly after he sold 15,000
Right.
there last spring. He sold 15,000 head of feeder cattle, and we had been talking about this issue. And he called me up and he said, yeah, we started at 3 o'clock in the morning. We ran till about 7 or 8 o'clock that next night. Or that long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know how many of those cattle I would have had to put a mandatory EID tag in if this deal had gone through? And I said, biggest part of, he said, all of them. I would have had to put a tag in all of them. He said, I got pretty nice facilities. He's got the nicest stockyard in
Mm-hmm.
the nation and the biggest. And he said that it can't be done. I don't have the facilities to do it. I don't have the help to do it. I don't have the room to do it. I don't have the time to do it. And he said, most of all, I don't want to do it and I ain't going to do it. And I don't blame him a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But these people that are putting that in, oh yeah, I think it'd be great. If we could just wave a wand over these cattle and, find out where they come from. You know, yeah. But they're not the ones that are having to do it. And where you live, where I lived for almost 20 years, the places that I've been traveling around, there's a lot of producers, and even the ones that handle their cattle with range cubes, and the cattle are pretty docile. That doesn't mean that they can put them in a headlock and put an ear tag in. And a lot of them, a lot of these producers, especially these smaller, older producers, they can kind of handle their cattle. They can move them around and get done what they need to, but they don't all, they'll reach over and put some Poron on them while they're bent over eating, or spray them for flies or something like that. But they don't have the ability, especially on the calves that are all wilder, to get a tag in them. So they're going to have to work. They're going to have to let the sale barn do it whenever they get ready to market those cattle. The sale barn's going to have to charge them at least $5 a head, probably $7 or $8 a head to run them through the chute and do that. You run enough cattle through the chute, you're going to kill one once in a while. You're going to cripple some up once in a while. Who's going to pay for that? The cattle are going to shrink. Who's going to pay for that? The producer. And then what I see happening is if a guy did what I like doing in Missouri, buying small deals of cattle, one here, two or three there, whatever, like kinds, and then putting them together, and putting a load of put together yearlings together. Uh, if he doesn't have a tag in all of them, or let's say the tag started out in different places or whatever, then he's looking at having to send them to the sale barn and have all that done. And he's like, gosh dang, I was kind of hoping these might make $25 a head, and I'm gonna have to give up $8 of it to put a damn
Hmm.
tag in their ear. And then you've got a feed yard over here, especially a corporate feeder, that says, hey, don't worry about that tag. Bring them tags. Just bring them over here and sell them to me. Here, I'll give you this
Hmm.
price right here. Won't have to pay no commission. Won't have to pay to put those tags in. We'll put those tags in for you when we put them in here. It's going to run people around the sale barn. And I'm a big sale barn proponent. I'm against anything that does away with sale barns. Sale barns are going great right now. We've had the highest prices we've ever had. The prices that we've attained in the sale barns, people wouldn't have the gall to ask those kind of prices in the country, because
Hmm.
they didn't know they were out there. We didn't know they were out there until we achieved them in the sale barns. And we don't have a hard time with transparency of prices on calves and feeder cattle, because we have these great sale barns all over the country selling them that way. And anybody can go in there and sit down and watch and see what's going on. We don't have that in the fat cattle arena, and we're starting to see how we don't have any leverage in the fat cattle markets. We still do in your calves and feeders, but if we start driving these sale barns away, uh, it's going to come down the pike.
Yeah.
When I first came to Missouri in 1999, they still had huge feeder pig sales
Hmm.
in Missouri, huge. Down in southern Missouri, it wasn't nothing for them to have 10,000 pigs, and it'd be just like a big feeder cattle sale. And when I go back to those areas now and I say, when's the last time you've been to a big feeder pig sale? Everybody just laughs,
Hmm.
because there's no such thing anymore.
Hmm.
And if you would have told those people 2 or 3 years before, you know, they're not going to be having any feeder pig sales, down in southern Missouri. Thayer, Missouri feeder pig sales no longer going to exist. Those people would have looked at you just like if you told them today that Joplin Regional Stockyards wasn't going to be having a sale in 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can go away really fast, and we've
Right.
got to support these transparent, competitive markets.
Yeah. And so, when you started telling people about the EID thing and kind of opening people's eyes, you got quite a reaction. And that was did you start, were you down at the convention when you started talking about this, or was it kind of before
I had
then?
been talking about it before, and then that came up in early February, and I had kind of heard through the grapevine that there was going to be some pushback, but I was still pretty naive at that time, thinking, well, this group, they just, they're wanting to see how their members want to vote on this policy, and then they'll push this policy. Well, I had no idea that how bad they wanted it, and still haven't had anybody tell me exactly why they want it so bad. But it's got to be money, Jim. You know that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's always money.
Yeah.
Money will cloud up anything. And so whenever we got to before we got to that NCBA, and I don't go to any of the meetings down there. I got a target on my back. I
Yeah.
do
Maybe you
go
should
to the
explain why you're there, I guess, because
yeah.
if you're not a fan of them and you're down at the convention.
Well, they do have the biggest trade show of the year,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a lot of advertisers on National Beef Wire and DB Auction and Feeder Flash, and they're all there. And so that's when we renew our deals with them. It's so much easier to be standing in the middle of that trade show, and you're talking to Dr. Rodrigo with Fairpiece, and he says, "Oh, I'm right over here," and you just walk over there and do it instead of having to travel to College Station, meet with one guy, and you can do it all right there at that big trade show. Well, I'd start, I had some pretty influential people that started. Calling me saying, or what you saying is right, because it was something that they were just going to slip in. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
going to make a big splash about it and tell people what they were doing. It was just going to come up in the meeting, and they said, well, we're all about these electronic tags, and I'm not even sure they were going to say the word mandatory about it, and then everybody say I, and then they push it through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I started giving people the heads up on it, then they started having a lot of people that fed a lot of cattle, that backgrounded a lot of cattle, that handled a lot of cattle, and they started calling in to your Texas Cattle Feeders Association, your Texas and Southwestern uh, cattle raisers, and they start calling in saying, "Tell me about this deal. I heard it on the feeder flash. Tell me about this deal." And they were like, "Oh, well, these EID tags are coming, and then the guys are like, whoa, you're gonna make me put them in there? You're gonna have policy that supports something that would make me do this shit?" And then they started getting some serious blowback. And all these associations are membership driven. And I thought, well, that would be no problem. If I'm sitting here at Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, nobody ever calls. You know, I get my divvy of the dollar a head check off, and we run around and promote things, and we basically all we do. And then Kansas Livestock Association and Texas Cattle Feeders tells us what to vote on every time we come to one of these meetings. Life's pretty easy,
Mm-hmm.
but it's membership driven. And then the phone starts ringing, and you've got people that are concerned and upset about what's coming down the pike. They didn't like that at all. You would think that a membership driven organization would want phone calls.
Right.
You call up matter than shit. And I say, "Hey Jim, how you doing? How's your wife and kids? How's everything going?" No, no, no. They didn't want to talk to them. They just want their membership dues, and they
Right.
want to be able to vote them. They want to mark them on the tally card of how many members that they have, which shows their strength.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, there were a lot of people with a lot of influence that showed up at that meeting and lent their influence, and very wisely, the new president of NCBA said, "Hey, we've had a lot of blowback on this deal. Let's don't even vote on it. All we're going to say is that we support the use of electronic ID tags for record keeping," which is fine. But
Right.
they didn't vote on the policy. But you could tell how mad they were that they didn't get to push this through, because immediately at that meeting, and especially after that meeting where they didn't end up voting on the policy, then you had TSCRA and TCFA and Kansas Livestock Association people going around in groups trying to intimidate my advertisers and DB Auction and National Beef Wire advertisers into pulling, not doing any business with us anymore. And and I was glad, because that we only had one that did, and they were pretty woke anyway. So and they weren't doing a whole lot with us anyway. But all of our big advertisers, all of our Therapies, our Bimedas, our Norbrooks, our big outfits that we count on every day, they all told them to fly a kite.
Yeah.
He said, "Don't come in here, with your hats on, trying to intimidate me. Screw you. Get out of here.
Right.
You don't tell me what to do." And I was proud of that. It was pretty volatile there for a short time, but this deal is still getting crammed down our throat, whether NCBA has policy for it or not.
Yeah. And
And
what blew my mind on that whole deal, it's like we hear all this stuff about cancel culture, right? And you never,
oh
like,
yeah,
that's exactly what happened. That is cattle industry cancel culture. I mean,
yeah. This
they
guy
tried
doesn't
to
agree
get.
with us. Let's shut him up. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
not like you were lying about, I mean, all you did
No,
was say what the policy was and what people would have to do. So really all you did was inform people, and
right.
they went around and said, I'm sure their end goal was end of you being on feeder flash.
Oh,
And
sure. Yeah. They don't
so
want people like us talking about the issues, making it into a form that it's real easy for people to obtain, guys out there, and I talk to guys every time I'm out traveling, and I'm in Beaumont, Texas right now. I spoke to a group of Southeast Texas producers last night, and I'll tell you, oh, they tell you, they listen to you every day. They don't listen to me every day, but they listen to me regularly. But they'll say, I put it, you can get it on your pickup now with your Bluetooth. They say I listen to you while I'm driving to my rented place to check my
hmm
cows over there. I listen to you. I set it up on the pickup and listen to you while I'm grinding feed. Uh, you know, and it's a way for them to obtain some knowledge, and they don't have to sit down with a publication and read stuff that's 3 weeks old. You know,
right.
and like Rob Cook said to me, several years ago, people are too lazy to read, and they don't have time to read,
Yeah.
and I'm the same way.
Did that surprise you? I mean, it really kind of did. I just thought about it like as when that whole thing happened and you talked about them trying to get rid of your advertisers. Were you pretty surprised by that, or were you kind of like you knew how
I
they
was
were
a
going to
little bit
operate?
surprised. I was a little bit surprised at them going around and blatantly saying that. And of course, a lot of our advertisers, they felt they felt emboldened to tell
Right.
them to get lost.
Yeah.
You know, we gained some advertisers. We
Right.
lost one. We gained several advertisers for standing up for small producers. And if you're talking about a drug company or anybody that's selling products to people that run cattle, they're not going to make any money off Freona Industries.
hmm
They're not going to make any money off Cactus. Cactus is going to go to headquarters and they're going
hmm
to negotiate a deal with them. Where they're going to make money is on the small producers
Right.
that are paying retail for these products.
Yeah.
And that's what they want. That's the person they want to reach, and that is my audience.
hmm
And yeah, I was a little bit surprised. I was even more surprised whenever I got back home, and I live in the Amarillo area. I live in Canyon, Texas, and saw that Texas cattle feeders they're still got the red ass over it. My you probably heard my alma mater, West Texas A&M, which is 3 miles from my house, and where my youngest daughter just started as a freshman in the ag department, and I've been helping with their ag day. Uh, uh, fundraiser that they have every fall. I've been helping auctioneer with my buddy that I went to auctioneer school with so long ago. And we've been doing that and been having great success with it. Of course, they got new facilities there, and it's a lot of fun. They went to West Texas A&M and told them that if I was going to be involved in volunteering my auctioneer services, they were not going to be involved, and they were not going to They were not going to support it. They weren't going to buy anything in the auction of the donated items. And who has money there? It's it's checkoff dollars
Right.
that they're supporting with. You know, if they're funding something, if they're donating something, it's somebody else's money that they're using
Yeah.
to do it. But they weren't going to do it because they didn't want to be involved in it if I was involved in it. And
So they
I had several of my listeners call me later and say, you know, I called up there and told them that I didn't agree with that. And you know, they just said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And they're like, no, it ain't right. And they said, well, you know, he shouldn't be bucking us, you know. They told one of my listeners that they couldn't believe that I had the balls to disagree with him.
and
That's
that's what
ridiculous.
blows my
Nobody
mind
has
the
that much
most
power.
is
Nobody has
because
that much power. Yeah, I mean, I see, you know, you get comments on your videos. I get comments on mine. They're not all supportive, you know.
right,
I love it when the haters are watching too.
right.
And then, you know, I'm a big Trump supporter, so I get all these leftist you know, Democrats, you know, and I was like, I thought maybe I had a handful that would listen, and you know they weren't going to be outspoken about it. But then you get these people on there, you know, telling us how bad Trump is on there. I don't know any cattle producers that are not Trump supporters. To
Right.
be honest with you, there's probably a few somewhere, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting, and I think they have bots, and I think they have people that are out to put bad press on you,
Hmm.
trying to get you shut down. I mean, I know that you've had to have gone through that too.
Yeah, probably not as much as you. I mean, you have so many connections. And so they
Mhm.
told you you couldn't auctioneer it anymore at the deal?
Yeah.
West Texas A&M.
It was just a couple of weeks ago, and actually my buddy that had been auctioneering it for the last 20 years, you know, I was gone, so I wasn't able to help so long. And I'd been helping the last 7 or 8 years since I'd been back around home there. He told me, he said, gosh dang, he said, they're really, this is a real deal. He said, they told me you couldn't help me. I was going to have to find somebody else. I said, well, we know what they're capable of now. So
So,
I said, that's
what's your
okay.
opinion? What's your opinion on who's behind? Like you said, it's obviously I don't think a member driven thing. It's their members aren't calling up and saying we don't want Corbitt involved in anything.
No, it's
Um,
staff. It's
it's
the
mainly
staff
just
on
paid
these different,
staff
yeah,
that has. Do you think they're getting marching orders kind of from NCBA
absolutely.
or do you think it's more the corporate, some of the big feed yards and stuff that are pushing this thing? Do you think it's more than it?
No, I don't think that. And I tell you what, I go to different meetings at different times where there's a lot of corporate feeders there, and they're always interested in visiting, talking about the issues. To tell you the truth, most of them that work for those corporate feeders, they grew up just like you and I did
Hmm.
on some kind of a small operation. They say, "Man, I absolutely know you know, I know where you're coming from." And he said, but you know, right now we're working for a corporate outfit, and it's got a board of directors, and the only thing they care about is profit. So we
Right.
have to please them. But I appreciate, you know, most of them say, you know, I appreciate your views and agree with most of them, but you know, I'm in this situation where I
Hmm.
can't be that way.
Yeah.
It's these trade association people, you know, that are just, you know, doing snow angels and all these dollars that come from the producers.
Hmm.
And you know, it's frustrating that they have as much power as they do. But you know, I talk to a lot of people that are on the board or higher up in a lot of these trade associations that still listen to me, and they say, you know, that my name comes up a lot in those meetings. Of course, nobody's got the balls enough to say anything to me whenever I see them at places. They just come around behind my back, you know, and try to uh, take the rug out from under me. But
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. That's the question I always thought, but it's mainly you're just thinking paid staff. And when you get down where you're at, Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers,
oh, they're
TCFA, there's a
big.
lot of paid staff, and I
They're
mean
big.
they're big outfits.
They're big. They tried to get some of their big purebred operators that have been on TV auction broadcasting themselves for years. They tried to get them to stop using us too, and just like with the advertisers, they said, they've got over 200,000 prospective buyers on there. I
Yeah.
really don't want to. I really
Right.
don't want
But
to
I
pull
mean,
myself from them.
but shout out to DV and all your advertisers and everything for
Yeah.
sticking with you because that can be a scary
Oh,
deal.
it's scary. Put you out of business. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, why do you think do you have to get out of here? Do you have a certain time?
No.
Okay. I had
Well, not till the cleaning lady comes and runs
a
me out.
All right. I was gonna make a joke there because I can edit this stuff out, but I'm not gonna about the
Well, why
cleaning
would you
lady
make it
coming
and
to
then
visit.
edit it out? Hell, don't do
About the cleaning lady coming to visit you, but I'll leave
that.
that alone. I wondered if because like you said you're heading to this rally in South Dakota and I just came back from North Dakota where it seems like in that and you talk about all the time the northern uh markets compared to the southern markets. Do you have a theory of why there is so much? It seems like there's so much more independence, and there isn't that control with the big NCBA affiliates up there, as there is more in the South with Kansas livestock, Oklahoma cattlemen's, the Texas ones that you were mentioning. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's all on head counts, and they just feed so many more cattle down there in cluster
Mm-hmm.
that KLA, Kansas Livestock Association, they really run everything. They tell Texas cattle feeders what to do. They tell Texas and Southwestern cattle raisers what to do. They basically tell NCBA what to do. And because you start driving around in rural Southwest Kansas, there are huge feed yards.
Mm-hmm.
You guys talked about a 300 header, and most people nowadays in Iowa and farmer feeders in Nebraska and Minnesota, places like that, most of them that are still doing it will feed 999 head because if they
Mm-hmm.
keep it under 1,000, then that keeps the permits and things to a minimum. But these guys are feeding 50, 60,000 head just all over the place. And that's a lot of head, and it gives those associations a lot of money, and they actually have to share their dollars with other state affiliates that don't have as many cattle running through them, and they get very power hungry. And you've got guys that's been sitting in integral uh, positions within those organizations for way too long, and they get like Boss Hogg or J.R. Ewing, and you just don't see that when you get further up into the Midwest and places like that. Somebody will be elected to hold a position, he'll hold it for a couple of years and move
Yeah.
on. You just don't see that down the Southern Plains.
Yeah. And I kind of had a theory too, and what you're saying probably makes way more sense to me. But I do the Longhorn stuff, and I went down to the show at Western Heritage Classic, and this was probably, I don't know, 2010 around there, in Abilene. You're probably familiar, right, with Western Heritage Classic, that big ranch rodeo, which all the big ranches come to. And it was
It used to be one of the first ranch rodeos. Now they have ranch rodeos
Yeah,
everywhere. But yeah,
yeah, and it was the first one I've been to because they don't have them up here. But it
yeah.
was a neat deal, one of the neatest shows I've ever done. But they set me up next to the chuck wagon cookout, which a lot of the old timers from ranch country are sitting over there at the chuck wagon deal and doing that thing. And I got to talking to some of the guys, and what I thought was really interesting, as I've thought about it kind of over the years, is you know, the bragging rights down there, it's kind of like, well, this guy worked on the 4.6s and this guy worked on this ranch and this guy worked on that big ranch. And it's like if a kid grows up on a small outfit or, a little ranch his parents own and he wants to be a big cowboy, his goal isn't to take over the family ranch. His goal is to go manage on the 4 6s or, Tongue River or whatever
Yeah,
they are down there. And I kind of thought, I think the further north you go, there's less of that. Like the goal for them is to have their own place. Like I feel like in Texas, you could start out from nothing and get yourself a herd of 2,000 cattle or something, but you still aren't nothing if you haven't
ain't
worked on one of them
nothing.
big outfits.
But the hell of it is,
Um,
Jim, those people that work on those big ranches like that, they couldn't tell you within $20 a hundred what the fat cattle market is.
right.
And you got a guy that's trying to raise a few cattle in Iowa or Minnesota somewhere. He knows exactly what it is.
Hmm.
And they're so far removed from ownership and management, down in those Texas places, like the Wagner Ranch,
Yeah.
it was owned and ran by an old woman that grew up out east somewhere, and she was the only known uh, you know inherited person of it, and so they moved her down there and put her in this big house, and that's gone by the wayside now. But
Yeah.
she was the one that owned everything, and then she just had these different managers under her, and they all had come up through the ranks just being a cowboy. But
Yeah. And now the Walmart guy owns it, or somebody connected to
yeah,
Cronky.
so
Cronky is his name.
yeah,
But he bought
and
it.
it's
But yeah,
mostly over water rights now. that's
yeah,
that's how these ranches, and those big ranches, you can't own that much land and pay for them with cattle. There's
right.
not a place, and we've talked about this before. There's not a place in the United States that you can buy land and pay for it by running cattle. You
Yeah,
just can't do it. I mean, it's
right.
impossible. And even where land's cheap, you got to have more of it. Like I said, you can't buy a place, pay for it by running cattle. And I've had these guys, especially in the Southern Plains, they tell me, these cattle ranches, they work a lot better, in the shade of windmills and pump jacks
Hmm.
and things like that. And the management of the royalties, the minerals, and all that kind of thing makes a bigger impact on whether
Right.
that ranch is successful than the
Yeah.
cattle.
And I've heard that before too. Like if you got that kind of money coming in, then cattle are almost, and so once you get further north, the cattle are what are paying the bills completely.
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
then and so you get a lot more people paying attention and fighting these kind of deals.
sure.
Um One thing that came up in North Dakota is this black shirt feeders. We were talking about size of feedlots. Have you looked into that very much? It's starting to get
I,
on
I've
a lot of
I've just
people's.
when I see an update on it, I read it.
Yeah.
My great grandpa lived in Binkelman, Nebraska, which originally the site was going to be very near Binkelman. They moved it a little ways further, but that's kind of what drew it to me. And I've kind of read and watched the updates on that. It sounds like it's going to be a pretty impressive outfit.
Yeah, what's opened my eyes, and I'll talk about it more. We don't need to go down the rabbit hole, but they're saying it's a square mile, 150,000 head, concrete pins, with a big biodigester that they're gonna scoop all the shit into for the methane. So they're gonna be making money off the carbon or whatever. But I guess with kind of I don't like I said we can go down all kinds of rabbit holes, but what is there a point where 150,000 head? Is there a point where too big is too big, or I mean, what are you? Where's this thing going, and how do you get control of it? I guess.
They've got some pretty big players that are heavily invested in that. And from what I understand, a large portion of the cattle are going to be beef on dairies.
I think all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they're planning on, whether they can
Hmm.
find enough to fill that thing or not. But this beef on dairy deal is that's a whole new angle to this industry. And there's the way that they want to handle those cattle and feed those cattle. It really would be impossible for them to do it in a multiple smaller feedlot type of an operation deal. I'm not against the big feedlots. Of course, I have more love for the smaller farmer feeders and the small operators, but you're getting into kind of a assembly line type of an outfit there, and that's kind of the way those beef on dairies are going cattle are
Hmm.
going to be. You got to treat them a different way than you do regular cattle. And a lot of people ask me if I think that they are flooding the industry with cattle or anything like that. We always had those cattle, and
Hmm.
we are putting them through the system a heck of a lot quicker
Hmm.
because, and a lot of people that don't know what beef on dairy is, you only need about the top third of your dairy cows to make replacement heifers with. So the bottom two-thirds, you usually contracting those baby calves to somebody that's going to feed them. Well, those ones that have the contracts for the baby calves that you're not going to be keeping, they're giving them the best beef bull semen that there is, and they're having black crossbred calves, and they're not turning those cattle out. They're not selling them. They're not grazing them. They're not doing anything. They put them on a liquid diet until they wean them from that, and then they put them right on feed. And
Yeah.
you're not going to make beef any faster than that. And the heck of it is those cattle are fairly light muscled because they're half dairy. Light muscled cattle quality grade very well because their ribeye is not so densely tight with muscling. So we get a really high quality carcass. It's a moderately sized carcass. It's not like these 16, 1700 pound cattle that we're seeing them take the beef cattle to. The cattle usually are slaughtered around 13, which used to be where I used to take cattle at harvest. But it's just a different animal there. I wish them the best there, but it's not really helping or getting involved in our cattle marketing process that I know and love,
Yeah.
and I know you do too.
I guess another way to stay, is there any way, like we talked about how the things have just kind of rolled, the smaller guys have got out, bigger guys have gotten bigger. Is there any way to roll that back? I mean, I've tried to rack my brain, like how do we ever get small producers again? And I think there's a lot of this direct marketing now that's happening, and that might be part of a solution. But I just wonder if
You
you
know,
ever thought about that.
I think the pandemic brought a lot of that to view, or people start paying attention of it. I know of a lot more smaller packing plants that are now selling retail, and I think it's great. And I think it's taken a little bit of the cattle, even though it's minute, out of the big four's hands. But I know a lot more people that do that. If people want to pay for it, that premium quality stuff, where you know where it came from and you know that it's all American and all that kind of thing, it's out there, and those consumers that can afford that, they know that it's out there and they are finding it and they are appreciating it. We talked about Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act briefly earlier. And if we could have gotten that, I think that would have held off the chickenification, lambification, hogification of the beef industry. It would have held it off for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
It may have insured this industry for cattle feeders' kids, but definitely probably not their grandkids. It's just when we let the beef and cattle establishment, which is what I call, all these big trade associations and their corporate buddies and partners and everything. When we let them take this thing over, and they didn't want transparency, they didn't want negotiated, they didn't want uh, uh, any kind of competition in the market. When they voted against that and pushed it back, it's just a matter of time before this cattle industry goes like the hog industry did. And what they did with the hog industry, you think, well, there's still hogs out there. They took it away from the individuals. If there's somebody out there feeding hogs now, it's for the show ring or for some very, very small niche.
Hmm.
It's not, they're not really involved in the industry anymore.
Yeah.
We've got these.
We have a neighbor that has, he had them when I was growing up, all these hog huts out in his pasture. And he navigated this thing better than anybody, I think, is he signed on with this Neiman Ranch, and he's been able to survive. But yeah, you don't ever see that. And all his hogs, they're on in buildings, they're out on hog huts, and and he still does it the old way. But he had to find, like you said, that very narrow niche, to be able to survive that way. And it's been kind of neat to see, but you just don't see it very often.
You don't see
Um,
it.
so to get on to saving the industry and the country and every other thing, we should talk about our friend Jack Payne, who is out in Fallon, Nevada. He was on here a couple weeks ago, and you're going to be out there. I said he doesn't need any to get any of these big politicians. He's got Corbitt. So, um, you want to talk about what you're doing out? Did you see his interview
I did.
on the CPAC thing? He
I
did a hell of a
did see
job,
it.
I thought.
He's been doing a great job, and he's rougher around the edges than I am by a long shot.
Right.
But that's how Jack and I met. Was 4 years ago. He put a Trump rally on
Oh.
in 2020, and anyways, he became a feeder flash watcher.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know how Jack is, he's just he's gonna find out who this guy is and call him up and get
Yeah.
involved with him. And so, he called me up and we started visiting on a regular basis. And then he put his sale barn on DV auction broadcasting, and it's been working great for him because he's in a spot, out there in rural Nevada, and he's got these high value, uh, they're high altitude desert calves, which are hard to find and they're bulletproof. And he's selling them, you know, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, online. And anyway, we got to be pretty good friends, but I'd never shaken hands with him. And then he was going to have this Trump rally, and he said, "Well, you're coming to it, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Well, there's a lot of things I'd like to go to, but it costs a lot of money." And he says, "I said, you can hire me, and I'll come out there and sell it for you." Done. And so I go out there to help auctioneer the Trump sale 4 years ago. And then he said, "Well, hey, we're having a big feeder cattle sale here too. You're going to help sell it too, aren't you?" And then I started doing that, and then I've been going out there several times a year and helping auctioneer his feeder cattle specials, and just gotten acquainted with a lot of the buyers and the consigners and the people around there. And it's a good time. And he's a big patriot. He's got the lease. He owns the lease on a over 1 million acre ranch out there.
Mm-hmm.
And his grazing the public lands is a big deal to him. And so he pays attention to the politicians and how he feels that they view things like that. He's scared to death of a Kamala Harris administration, as I am, and he wants to do everything he can to help Trump get back in. And so we're going to go out there, and he's got a big roping. He's got a scene where he's got $40,000 added to this roping
Right.
now. It's going to be a big deal. We're gonna have a big crowd at the Trump rally. He's got several cattle donated. All that money, when they sell those cattle, goes to the Trump campaign. Got several nice items. We're gonna do that. It'll be an interesting time. And like I said, I'm headed out there tomorrow and looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's funny as you say all that stuff because when he was telling me about his rally and everything, I was kind of like, Jack, you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, but it's kind of how he operates. He gets it done. Like he's
Well,
like, I'm gonna
Jim, you
do
may
this.
not know this, but Fallon, Nevada, that's where the Top Gun school is.
Oh,
Like,
he told me the
Tom
Navy
Cruise.
took the Navy took 100,000
Oh
acres.
yeah, that all that is bombing it. If you look at the state of Nevada,
Yeah.
I'm not exactly where but it's like 90% of the land is owned by the government
Mm-hmm.
in the state of Nevada. If you're ranching in Nevada, you've got some kind of a lease, a government land lease.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just impossible to ranch there. Not, and then you look at the state of Texas, and like 90% of the land is privately owned.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's what's cool that the movie Top Gun that's about that school where those Navy pilots come in there. That's in Fallon, Nevada.
Hmm.
So and it's easy to get to if anybody
Yeah,
wants
it's
to
close
come
to
to it.
Reno. If you're flying in,
It's
you can
very
fly to
it's
Reno.
You can fly into Reno and it's not even an hour drive from there, and it's an easy drive,
Right.
and it's a
But I was
it's
just
a it's a
thinking,
cool
like,
place.
when he had that idea, he's not one to be like, oh, that's too much, or I'm not gonna be able to make that work. He's like, we're doing it and we're getting it done, and now he's doing interviews and he's getting people out there, and it's been pretty cool to see.
And he spends a hell of a lot of his own money,
Yeah, I
getting
know.
that put on too.
Yeah, and
So
he
you
just
got to
put
hand it
out,
to
he
him.
sent that commercial. He just put a commercial together, and people who've
Oh, the
seen
Ranchers
that,
for Trump. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
yeah, and he just wrote a check for it. I mean,
Yep.
it's not from some uh big time PAC organization or donation or
No.
any of that kind of stuff. He's putting his money behind this
Jack
deal.
Payne. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to too explain if people wanted to bid on that stuff, because you can explain it. DV Auction's going to be there for the cattle sale. So,
And we're going to broadcast it. We're also going to broadcast the sale of the non-cattle items
all
too.
right.
And so he's got a lot of cool stuff donated there.
I sent
He
him some
gathers
Longhorns.
cattle with helicopter,
Yeah,
and
right.
and he is one of the items he's donating is an 8-hour ride in the helicopter gathering those cattle off those mountains out there in Nevada. Now that if you got the stomach for it, now that would be cool.
Yeah, I know. That's a once in a lifetime
Oh
opportunity
yeah,
for
it's
somebody.
just
And there's got to be some millionaire out there or
that wants to do
billionaire
that. Yeah.
who's like, there's no other way of doing that unless you bid on this thing. And so if they want to bid on it, they can sign on to DB auction. And how do they
Yep,
do that?
they then get on DV auction. It's I think it's at like 4 o'clock in the evening, and that would be Pacific time, in on Saturday, and is that the 28th? I think
Yeah,
that's when and we're gonna have that broadcast on DV auction. You can get on there, get registered, and you can bid right there on those items. And then we're gonna go in the sale barn and start auctioneering those cattle. And you can buy those cattle, and then Jack will resell them for you later if you don't actually want the cattle or whatever. But you can buy those cattle. All that money goes to Trump 47
right.
campaign.
And the important
And
part, this isn't like, well, I'll just write a check to the campaign. It's best to go through this way, because then Trump is getting a check from ranchers. Like, this is ranchers for
yes,
Trump. And
yeah.
so he
Now
knows,
they are taking donations too.
right,
And if you
right.
want them to come from that event, they are
Yeah,
taking donations, and he's got a lot of checks. And I've talked to guys as far away as Minnesota that own sale barns, and they said, "Hey, we want to help out with this deal too, and
right,
how can we get involved in it?" And so it's we're going to have some people from the CPAC committee there speaking this time. 4 years ago, we had Don Jr. there, which
right,
was a lot of fun, and they I remember they had a big banner up and it said Don Jr. 2024. Of course,
right. Yeah,
we all thought that Trump was going to get elected last time and we would need Don Jr. Well, they had that banner tied to the side of a cattle pot, and with the picture of Don Jr. standing there next to a
right.
cattle pot taking that picture was really cool.
Yeah, and he was on Fox News and they were talking about it
Yes,
on
he
there.
was.
And
He was.
yeah, so that's cool. And yeah, I'll try to put those links in the description here of how you get registered for that deal. And if you want to help out, you get on that auction and bid on that stuff.
Yep.
Um, And then I guess I sent that commercial to some people in Jack's interview, and somebody sent back, well, if Trump, it was Shad actually. He said, "Well, Trump's got to be out there now after watching that deal." And I always said, like, that's the best photo op ever. Go out to Fallon, Nevada, where go to a cattle sale barn, and everybody's in love with Yellowstone and all this cowboy
Oh yeah.
stuff. I think that would
Well,
go a long way.
times have changed a little bit with all
Oh
these
yeah,
efforts to assassinate our beloved Donald Trump. And we didn't know until kind of last minute that Don Jr. was going to be stopping at
right,
the rally in Fallon. And we were kind of hoping that might happen again, maybe even with the big
Yeah.
guy, because that's a real battleground state right there in
Hmm.
Nevada. And we thought, well, if he's close, he might come over here and pull in. But they've got to do a lot of stuff before you can have somebody like that come
Right.
anymore. And
Yeah.
you just got these nuts that I think are kind of connected somehow or another, and you can't trust it anymore.
Right. Don't want to
We
let
did
the
we did we
CIA's.
did have a producer, uh, Dwayne Martin Jr. from out in California. He owns several of his own pots, and 4 years ago they needed something to put a perimeter around that parking lot there at Nevada Livestock Marketing, and he had his pots shining, and he had the trailers acidized and everything, and had those covering the perimeter. And I thought that was cool. Maybe
You
I'm
probably
just
had to wear
a
your
cattle truck
sunglasses
guy,
out
but
there.
super cool, yeah.
Yeah.
But it'll be a good time, and people should get involved in it.
Yeah. And then
And then
to
we've got the big rally in Rapid City
Yeah, that's
right
what I was
after
gonna
that.
say. To see how you operate, you go straight from one to the next, and you're out there
Oh
working.
yeah, it's a life of luxury. Yeah, yeah. I'm not a Danish sized guy, and I get to cram myself in an airplane and fly around to all these places.
I
Yeah.
wondered how much you drove and how much you flew.
I'm not driving to Fallon, Nevada. I
Yeah.
guarantee you that. But
So
and
you
I'm
fly
not driving to
coach?
Rapid City either.
You fly coach?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the other thing
Usually
people don't realize. How tall are you? 6'6"?
6'5". Yeah.
6'5"? Yeah. That's the first thing I thought when I saw you. Dang, you're a big guy. You're a tall
Yeah, be
guy.
going everywhere. Yeah, I usually fly Southwest, but I will pay you extra $25 for the early bird so I can get a decent seat on it. But that's
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. So what are you doing so that's October 7th, the Freedom Rally. I heard do you know Eric Groper at all? He
I I know of him, but I don't know him.
he's you probably meet him out there and he'll fit right in with you. I always tell him you guys would get along good, but he said that he wanted Brett and Justin Tupper to hold hands while they walked out on stage there because it's an RCAF. Brett
Well,
Kenzie
people don't understand all the history with RCAF. It's kind of a big deal that U.S. Cattlemen's Association and RCAF are putting this rally on together. And I had been at a rally several years ago with Bill Bullard, and it did not turn out well. Save the Steel rally. I don't know if you remember that one in Omaha. That did not turn out well because they got organization for competitive markets involved, and there's a bunch of snakes in that deal, and they threw me under the bus, and I thought, oh my gosh, these people are not all straight up like the ones that I've met along the way. But I tell you what, we have got to try to support Harriet Hageman's resolution to stop this mandatory EID, and we got to give it our all. And even if we can't stop this one on the breeding stock, if we put up a big enough fight, they might think twice about just throwing us into all classes,
right.
because it was just a stroke of the pen by the Ag Secretary Vilsack that caused it to go this far.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, I just don't know anybody that is for it.
Right.
Maybe a past president of NCBA, or somebody that's got some kind of a purebred outfit and they've been EID and everything so long. But a straight up regular producer, even a lot of them that use EID for record keeping, I don't know any of them that are for mandatory EID.
Yeah. And some of the biggest opponents of it are they use EIDs because they realize the value. They're selling premium these program deals and
Well,
that's the
where's that
reason they have.
premium going to be when they make everybody do it?
Right,
It's
exactly.
going
And
to be
that's
gone.
why yeah,
Yeah.
that's why they're against it. But
That's another thing. But it's just it's complete government overreach. Somebody, you got cattle turned out a long ways from where you live. Who's to say that they can't send a drone out there and scan all those cattle?
mhm.
Know too damn much about your business. We saw what it did in Europe. I think it was in Denmark where they started sending out $100 a head tax bills for the carbon that those
Right.
cattle were putting
Denmark, I
out.
think. Yeah.
And then Ireland, they ended up destroying like 40,000 head of cattle
Hmm.
because they said that they've got their own green deals out there. It's just crazy.
Right.
And cattle production is one of the most independent things left in this country, and I think we need to keep it as independent as we can.
Yes, sir. And so I feel like we've done plenty of time, but the last thing I wanted to ask you is kind of what's your thoughts on what the future holds? I guess you're a market guy, so you got to always look out at the future. What's the future hold for the cattle industry?
Well, the people that regularly watch the feeder flash are kind of some of them are frustrated with me because I say we're in a down market now. Well, we've come off those highs that we achieved through, you know, all-time record prices. Just 2 to 3 months ago, we had all-time record high prices in every single class of commercial cattle that we sell. We're coming off of those now. It's kind of like in 2014 and 15. It's a 10-year cycle in the fours, in these years that end in four, that's where we're going to see our all-time record prices. After that, it's going to tail off. And I realize that we're probably going to have less beef cows next year than we had this year, but still, the party's kind of over on the market. I think we're going to stay really high. And if you don't think cattle are high now, take a history lesson because they're extremely high if you put it in if you look at the whole picture. And I think we're going to stay really high. I think we're going to be headed down. I think this next spring we'll see a little rally. I think we'll get back up there. I don't think we'll get to the prices that we achieved this last spring, but it's going to be pretty good. The market's going to fall. Eventually going to start keeping some heifers back when these cattle come to market and they're not bringing as much as they did, earlier this year. Then you'll see producers say, "Well, I can afford to keep a few more heifers back this year," and so they'll do that. We'll have a little bit of herd build back, not nearly as big as we've seen in the past. The market's gonna ease up some, but it's not gonna go down as far as it did last time. And cattle, just like everything else, they're gonna stay higher. But if you can't manage your cattle production, in a kind of a flat year or a slightly down year, you can't just plan on raising cattle when markets are at all-time record highs.
Hmm.
You got to use risk management. You got to keep your input prices as low as you can, and do the best job with your management. But the cattle market's still really good. I think it's still going to be really good for a couple more years, and then it's going to fade off there, where it's going to be kind of tough. But start preparing for the next run, which will probably be 32, 34. That
That
sounds
that
like a
was
long,
gonna be.
long ways away, but
I said that was my last question, but then listening to you talk and what I'd heard you say before, nobody probably knows the market as good as you do. Do you still have the itch? Do you ever get the itch? You said you always
I
had the
do, I
itch to.
do, and I'm one of these guys. I'm in my 50s, and I'm thinking, it'd sure be nice if I had me a little herd of cows over here. And that's what a lot of our producers are people that always wanted to be in the cattle business or were in the cattle business, and they want to do it. You know, not everybody got a ranch give to them, and
Hmm.
and a lot of people had to work their whole life to build up a nest egg to be able to have something where they could run some cattle. And a lot of our producers are retired people that's always wanted to do that, and now you're making it where it's not fun for them anymore.
Hmm.
You're mandating that they do this, and you're telling them they got to do that, and all this kind of stuff. People don't want to do that, and you're forcing older producers. I know a lot of older producers that don't own any land. They rent small places here, there, yonder, and they have to spend most of their days running around checking on cattle and things and fixing fence and doing that kind of stuff. The mandatory EID and these different things like that, are pushing them out of the industry, and I hate that.
Right. Yep. All right. Well, I say that's pretty good note to end on. Find you
I
at
think so.
DV Feeder Flash. Is it Feeder Flash on YouTube? It just comes up automatic on mine, so
Yeah,
I don't even.
you can just look up on Feeder Flash, and I need more subscribers. So if you find it on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. I'm wanting to get to 20,000 here before long on the subscriber side. But
Right.
National Beef Wire, just on internet. There's tons of market information on there, and you can get the Feeder Flash on there, and you can get lots of quotes and quotes. Of course, if you're shopping for bulls or looking for cattle auctions to view, dvauction.com.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
It's
You
been
bet.
great. It was a lot of fun.